If I'm former New Orleans Saints head coach Sean Payton, I know exactly which job I'm waiting to open up this offseason. We got all that and a little bit of lagniappe for you on today's episode of Locked On Saints.
You are Locked On Saints, your daily New Orleans Saints podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is good, Who Dat Nation and Who Dat family? Welcome into another episode of Locked On Saints, your daily podcast covering your favorite team, the New Orleans Saints, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Thanks so much, as always, making Locked On Saints your first listen of the day every day. Don't forget, we're free and available on all podcast apps as well as on YouTube. And I'm your host, Ross Jackson, at Ross Jackson Nola on Twitter. You can find me over at USA Today's Saints Wire, Tuesdays on Locked On NFL, and here with you every single Monday through Friday. And on today's episode, we're going to go through some bold predictions ahead of training camp. I'm going to tell you where the New Orleans Saints have some trade value on their roster, and we'll also take a look at your bold predictions as well from the folks that were nice enough to contribute on Twitter. But first, I want to start off with a story that seems to be picking up a little bit of steam. Former New Orleans Saints head coach Sean Payton already starting to get linked to some teams, as we've kind of expected. There have been teams that have come up, like the Dallas Cowboys, who will continuously come up in all of these conversations. The Miami Dolphins, which makes absolutely no sense because they recently hired biracial king Mike McDaniel, and he's not going anywhere for a while, I truly believe. But I'll give you three teams that I believe Sean Payton could actually end up coaching with in next season, 2023. And you might ask, Ross, why does this matter to me as a New Orleans Saints fan? Well, you need to think about it because Sean Payton coming back to coaching means a whole new set of draft capital and trade fodder for the New Orleans Saints. Remember, the New Orleans Saints still own the rights to Sean Payton's contract, which means that if, and I believe when, he comes back to coaching over the course of the next 3 years, the Saints would have to trade his rights to the team that hired him. So it wouldn't be as simple as Sean Payton just saying, all right, I'm out of here. I'm heading over to, this team, that team. And we'll discuss some of those teams here in just a second, including who I think will be where he goes and his best fit. But the Saints would actually get draft capital back from that team. So let's say that he ends up going and coaching for, let's just say, the Dallas Cowboys, right? The Dallas Cowboys would have to send draft capital or some trade fodder to the New Orleans Saints in order to obtain the rights to Sean Payton. So the Saints could end up with multiple first-round picks out of that, as well as some additional selections, maybe even a couple of players here and there. It would be a big-time move. You don't have to look too far back in the annuals of NFL history to find the last time that this happened. John Gruden was traded from the Raiders to the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, and the Bucs had to pay 2 first-round picks, 2 second-round picks, and $8 million in order to get him in order to get John Gruden in Tampa. Sean Payton should net at least that. Look, I've made the mistake in the past of referencing that you don't trade cash considerations in the NFL, but apparently with coaching, you just can't with players, whatever that means. The NFL is weird. And so, there's ways for the Saints to also end up coming out of this better in terms of salary cap health as well. So that's why you should care about where Sean Payton ends up next. And those three teams that I think Sean Payton could end up coaching next, the absolute best fit for me and where I think he may want to go. And if I was Sean Payton, I'm hoping that Brandon Staley gets fired this offseason and he ends up being able to take over as the head coach of the Los Angeles Chargers. Los Angeles Chargers have everything that he needs, as well as several fixtures already there that are a part of Sean Payton's former coaching staff. Brandon Nugent is there. Joe Lombardi is there as his offensive coordinator. He was the quarterback's coach for the New Orleans Saints. He would get to step in and even have some players there as well, like Will Clapp. But most of all, he gets to step in to an offense that's looking for ways to become more innovative and be able to build around its young superstar in Justin Herbert. And if Sean Payton becomes the head coach of the New Orleans Saints, the Los Angeles Chargers, make no mistake that I will be, and so will Deuce Wyndham, my friend from over at Who Dat Confessional, we will be referring to Justin Herbert as Justin Herbert moving forward. No questions asked. Number 2, the second team that makes the most sense would be the Dallas Cowboys. I don't think that it's going to happen. That would probably be the team that would net the better trade fodder as compared to the Los Angeles Chargers. I think the Chargers are going to be in a situation where they're going to have a good season in 2022, but then still move on from Brandon Staley because of some poor decision making that we have seen. We've seen him lose games for the Chargers. And we've seen the Saints be in a situation to where like they have taken more calculated risks under Sean Payton and come out on the right side of that. So even just that immediate comparison shows you that Sean Payton would be an upgrade there. But that Chargers team should still be successful in 2022. But in 2022, the Cowboys may have a larger question mark with Mike McCarthy still as their head coach. So look, there's been a lot of ties between the Dallas Cowboys and Sean Payton. I think Jerry Jones regrets letting Sean Payton walk away years and years and years ago. And then to see him take the trajectory that he took with the New Orleans Saints, he might want to make right on that wrong, a la what Sean Payton did with Malcolm Jenkins, for instance. So there could be an opportunity there. But ultimately, I don't think that Sean Payton ends up there. I think that the Los Angeles Chargers would be a better fit if that job becomes available. But hey, if Dallas is the only one available, you'll see. But usually there's 8 of these jobs that open up every offseason. And finally, could Sean Payton stay in the division? No, not the rival Atlanta Falcons. But what about the Carolina Panthers? Matt Rule, no one knows what he is as an NFL coach. I'm not sure that they figured it out in Carolina, and I don't know that they're any closer. But now you've gone out and you've made a move for a player like Baker Mayfield, who has the type of short to intermediate accuracy that a guy like Sean Payton has honed and turned into superstar status in the past, right? With Drew Brees. Now, Drew Brees, of course, is in an entirely different arena than Baker Mayfield, but you're looking for a guy that can maximize the skill sets that Baker Mayfield has. Sean Payton could be that guy. And you also have already tried to dip into the New Orleans Saints sort of pot of talent before by bringing in Joe Brady to have him try to revamp your offense. You gave him 1 year and then you moved on from him. So instead, now you go to the absolute source. You know that they're already interested in Sean Payton's play style. That's why they went and hired Joe Brady as their OC. Now you could actually bring in Sean Payton instead. Now that's where I think the Saints get their absolute best draft capital. Not only is he going within the division, but he's going to a team that is going to have a good draft position over the course of the next few years as they rebuild. But they might want to rebuild the roster after they reset at head coach, and that would make a lot of sense. Now, would Sean say yes to the Carolina Panthers and having to play against Dennis Allen and the New Orleans Saints twice a year, or would he be more comfortable going to a place in the AFC to where at most you're meeting them every now and then twice in 4 years, but for the most part, once every 4 years? I think that the AFC option is probably a lot better for him, but we'll see. I think there's going to be a lot of opportunity. There's going to be a big time market for Sean Payton over the course of the next few years. I guess it's worth looking at teams like the Philadelphia Eagles as well as the Miami Dolphins as well, but I think they seem to be pretty set at head coach, considering that the Dolphins just made their hire and have completely revamped their roster looking ahead with Mike McDaniel. So we'll see where he goes. But I think the Los Angeles Chargers are absolutely the best fit for Sean Payton. Speaking of the Philadelphia Eagles, they could potentially be a trade partner for the New Orleans Saints. So now as we start to turn our attention to bold predictions for Saints training camp, which player would be a really, really good fit in Philadelphia and that could bring a talented running back in return to New Orleans? Saints have a couple of pieces when it comes to trade fodder on their roster. We'll break it all down as we continue on with today's episode of Locked On Saints. First, I want to tell you about our friends over at Built Bar, the best tasting protein bar on the market, the protein bar that tastes like a candy bar. And right now, everyone's favorite, the coconut brownie chunk, has a puff bar now. So chocolate, just flavorful marshmallow plus coconut plus brownie chunks, all covered in 100% chocolate. Does it get any better than that? No, it doesn't. And it certainly doesn't get any better than Built Bar as a whole. Not only do they have that puff bar, they have a selection of puff bars. They have a selection of granola protein bars as well. And of course, their standard selection of protein bars that you can check out that include fruity flavors like raspberry, orange, and others that are all covered in 100% chocolate. They've got sugary sweet flavors that actually aren't that sugary at all. Flavors like coconut, flavors like coconut almond, which are kind of like Mounds and Almond Joy flavored bars, or they taste like those bars. Salted caramel, cookies and cream, all with about 4 or 5 grams of sugar, despite how sweet they are and how delicious they are. And again, covered in 100% chocolate. So if you want to take a break from those other protein bars and get yourself the candy bar that tastes like a protein bar, getting 17, 18 grams of protein in each one of these, make sure you check out built.com. Don't forget to use the promo code LOCKED15 so you can get 15% off. That's 15% off with the promo code LOCKED15 at built.com. All right, family, continuing on with today's episode of Locked On Saints. Thanks again for making us your first listen of the day every day. Don't forget that the Locked On NFL channel, starting on Monday, is going to be releasing the top 50 players. Who are the players that move the betting lines the most in the NFL? There's one faction that knows exactly how valuable a player is. It's the odds makers over at BetOnline. So July 18th, make sure you check it out on the Locked On NFL podcast or wherever you get your podcasts, including on YouTube. All right, so I want to talk about the New Orleans Saints trade fodder here. I want to do more than talk about it. I want to break it down. I want to highlight players that the New Orleans Saints could potentially put on the move when it comes to over the course of training camp or even throughout the preseason. Remember, at some point during the preseason, you're going to start to see roster cuts. After week 1, you're going to cut down from 90 to 85. Week 2 or the second preseason game, you're going to see them cut down from 85 to 80. And then after the final preseason game ahead of week 1, they're going to cut down from 80 down to 53. Sometimes New Orleans Saints will find ways to reduce their roster count while bringing back something in return. And sometimes that's trading for draft capital. There are 2 players that I look at for the New Orleans Saints that could potentially be on the move. One of which would bring back draft capital. One of which could bring back draft capital, but also instead could bring back a running back if the Saints do need to address that following Alvin Kamara's court hearing and trial, whatever ends up happening over the course of August. So the big player that I'll mention here first is Zac Bond. Zac Bond, I think, can net you some draft capital, but I also think he can net you a running back if you're able to be convincing enough in that trade market. Zac Bond is a player that had a lot of promise and still has a lot of promise in the NFL, but doesn't really seem so far like he has been the right fit for the New Orleans Saints. Think about what it is that made Zac Bond a draftable asset coming out of Wisconsin. It was the fact that he was a premier pass rusher. That's what he was able to do. And he was a speed pass rusher, which is not something that the New Orleans Saints have invested in highly really ever, right? They're usually about the power guys. So then they tried to move him to off-ball linebacker. That doesn't seem to have worked. They've now drafted 2 linebackers since then in Pete Werner and DeMarco Jackson. And then you also, of course, have Caden Ellis, who's continued to make plays. He continued to see playing time now over Zac Bond in certain situations. So the only thing that you can really do with Zac Bond at this point is continue to work him as an off-ball linebacker, utilize him as a special teamer, or you can move him back to edge rusher, but that doesn't seem to be what the New Orleans Saints are going to do. Listen to the numbers and the names when it comes to New Orleans Saints edge rushers. Taco Charlton, 6'5", 270. Marcus Davenport, 6'6", 265. Carl Granderson, 6'5", 261. Cam Jordan, 6'4", 287. Tano Passanio, 6'7", 289. And then Peyton Turner, 6'6", 270. You look at Zac Bond, 6'3", 225. One of these things is not like the other, right? He's not going to make it as a speed rusher for the New Orleans Saints or as a pass rusher for the New Orleans Saints because he doesn't fit the style. He doesn't fit the prototype of what the Saints do. So unless he's going to click as an off-ball linebacker, he should be a talent that you can trade and that should be able to bring back some assets because of his pass rushing prowess. He can perform up to I would say at least an adequate level to start, maybe even beyond that in a different system that allows him to do what it is that he does best, which is rush the passer. So trade him to a team like the Philadelphia Eagles, who he's an absolute fit when it comes to what it is that the Eagles like to do with their linebackers. They like smaller linebackers that are like almost safety size. That's where Zac Bond is as well, but they also like the linebackers that can rush the passer, which is exactly what Zac Bond can do. Now, you look at what you can get probably back for Zac Bond, who was a 3rd round selection. You're probably looking at a day 3 pick, 5th round pick at the best, or you return a talented running back. And there's a stable of running backs over in Philadelphia. Guys like Boston Scott, Miles Sanders, Jason Huntley, Kenneth Gainwell, and Kennedy Brooks. Imagine if you can get Kenneth Gainwell back for Zac Bond, or maybe you send Zac Bond and something else to get a guy like Kenneth Gainwell, and then you get him involved in your offense. There's a lot of opportunities for the Saints to be able to find some players that could potentially fit into what it is that they want to do if that's the route that they want to go in terms of moving on from a guy like Zac Bond. So you end up either impacting your roster count by trading him for a draft pick, or you address your roster needs by trading him for a running back. And the Eagles, of course, are just one example of many teams that utilize speed rushers and would be able to put Zac Bond in a system where he would be able to thrive a little bit more than the opportunities that he gets or doesn't get in this New Orleans Saints defense. And it'd be one of those situations where you trade him away and he's going to look better in another team, but you have to remember scheme, you have to remember system ends up being a huge part of that. The other player that the New Orleans Saints could potentially trade this offseason that would yield at least some draft capital would be Bradley Roby. And a key place to send him, easy place to send him, would be the Pittsburgh Steelers, who need some more help opposite or on the outside in particular, or maybe even in the slot, right? They need to figure out what they're going to be doing at the cornerback spot one way or another. But I don't think you get in a hurry to trade Bradley Roby. I think you wait on that. There was an article that came out, I believe it was a Bleacher Report article a couple of months ago, or maybe a month ago, that mentioned trading Bradley Roby before training camp. I don't think you do that. I think you still have question marks at corner, right? Could Paulson Adebo continue to develop and hold on to that spot going into his second year, which I believe he will? How good is Alante Taylor? How good are these other corners that you have in the room? And are they going to be able to provide you the depth that you're going to lose if you move on from a guy like Bradley Roby? Because effectively, if Alante Taylor pans out, you've got 4 starting cornerbacks, 4 starting outside cornerbacks. That's a really, really nice situation to be in if you're in New Orleans, but are you willing to pay the money for that to continue to be the case? Not that Bradley Roby's contract is expensive, but of course, you're looking at future years as well. So Bradley Roby could potentially net the Saints some draft capital back and end up being an easy roster cut while also getting something back in return if they were to trade him to a cornerback needy team like the Pittsburgh Steelers, maybe even like the Tennessee Titans, for instance, where you're able to get these guys out on the move. Minnesota Vikings, they invested there in the draft, but if you wanted to send them another veteran to help out opposite Patrick Peterson, there's an opportunity for you there as well. So there's a lot of different routes that the Saints could go with a guy like Bradley Roby. I think ultimately he ends up on the roster, but if they end up deciding that they wanted to move on there, they could get something back in return. All right, coming up next, we're going to wrap up the show with looking at bold predictions. I've got 7 bold predictions from our listeners and 3 bold predictions of my own, which include a big-time shuffle on the offensive line. We've got that coming up for you as we continue on to wrap up today's episode of Locked On Saints. But first, how you feeling about the New Orleans Saints at over under 8.5 wins? I feel pretty good about that, particularly the over. If you want to get in on that or any of the other odds, lines, and props that are available, you want to go and check out BetOnline today, the #1 source for all of your sports wagering needs. Whether you're looking for sports wagering information and advice or you're looking for the lines themselves, BetOnline has everything that you're looking for. You can find it on your mobile device or on your laptop, desktop, whatever it is that you're doing. Go to the library and log on if you need to. They'll get you all taken care of over at BetOnline. You can look at win totals for the New Orleans Saints. You can look at division finishes, Super Bowl odds. I believe the top Super Bowl odd for a New Orleans Saints involved Super Bowl is 80-1 right now. So if you think this is a Super Bowl caliber team, that might be something that you want to get in on today. And you can do that over at BetOnline, where the game starts. Let's get it, Who Dat Nation. Wrapping up today's episode of Locked On Saints with 10 bold predictions. We got 7 of them from listeners. We got 3 of them from me. I want to go ahead and get to our listeners first and foremost. So this was a question that I put out on Twitter, asking folks for their bold predictions, and some folks were nice enough to comment and contribute. So we're going to run through these as we go through. So showing them here over on YouTube, but reading them out loud over on the audio side. This one comes from Dylan Ellis at Scarecrow 80554. Saints cut Traquan Smith. Good news for some of those local guys down at the bottom of that wide receiver roster. This one is from Lars Rimfolk. Goodbye, Tony Jones. That's good news for Abram Smith if that were to happen. Then we got Luther Gwynn, good friend of the show. I think that Abram Smith will make a name for himself this preseason and will get several carries per game in the regular season. Big Blurred, my boy, that's over at Elusive Man on Twitter. Lucas Kroll makes a Team Smoke Monday will make the Saints trade Roby. So right where we were talking about earlier. At Life Through Fiction, my boy, Mr. Ruffins. That's his book right here behind me, by the way. So we've got Callaway wide receiver 4. Hurst wins that tackle position, and then we'll swing back over to that one. But then we've also got Juwan Johnson at tight end 1, coming from the mouth of the South himself, Darian Gray over at Locked On HBCU. And then finally, Blair Red, Ian Book gets cut. That's a pretty big one there. So we talked about Marquez Callaway at wide receiver 4. Hurst wins the left tackle position, and then Ruiz takes a huge step in the right direction. I think that's pretty nice to have like a little bit of a positive bold prediction in there too. Coach Red at Coach Blair Red on Twitter talking about Ian Book getting cut still has me shook because I'm a part of the book club here, man. Like don't be putting me out like that. But I want to talk a little bit about what it was that Sean just mentioned, because he talked about the fact that Cesar Ruiz could potentially like get it together. What happens if he can't? That's where my first bold prediction comes in. Big thank you to everybody that contributed, and really glad we get to do some like cool shout outs and stuff like that here on the show. We'll keep all that going. But as we get into my bold predictions, I want to start off with that offensive line, because what happens if he doesn't, right? What happens if he doesn't take that step forward in training camp? Should the Saints just move on from him? No, I think you continue, right? You invested a first-round selection in him. You let him see out at least the first 3 years of his contract, and you continue to develop him in the background. How do you do that? Well, if Trevor Penning wins left tackle, it gets really easy for you, right? Trevor Penning and James Hurst, Trevor Penning being the Saints' second first-round pick this year out of Northern Iowa, the left tackle that they're hoping is going to be able to be the long-term solution in place of Teron Armstead. Really, really good run blocker. Just has some technique stuff to work on in the passing game. If anybody asks you, what thoughts you have on Trevor Penning, what I usually say is he's good at everything you can't teach: size, attitude, relentlessness, all of that. But he needs help on the things that you can teach, the fundamentals of pass blocking, pass sets, things like that. So it's a good place to be in. That's what you want in terms of a developing rookie. You don't want to have somebody that's deficient where you can't teach them, right? So Trevor Penning could win, which would be the best case scenario for the Saints, that left tackle spot his rookie season. If that happens, then James Hurst all of a sudden becomes an option for you on the interior. That could mean that he pushes guys like Andrus Peat, or Andrus Peat's not ready yet, because remember, he had a season-ending injury last year. We don't really know where his recovery process is so far. Maybe he starts at left guard in that case, or he ends up being able to push Cesar Ruiz enough to continue his development, or push him to where he leaps Cesar Ruiz, and then Cesar Ruiz gets to develop comfortably behind the scenes with Doug Marrone and Zach Strief. So there are a couple of different ways that could end up going. So that would be my first bold prediction, is a reshuffle on the offensive line, not just one spot changing, but two spots. Trevor Penning winning left tackle, and then James Hurst winning at right guard. Next up, I've got Kentavius Street wins the starting spot at defensive tackle next to David Onyemata. Now, right now, that should be considered Shy Tuttle's spot. Absolutely no doubt about that. But the Saints went out and they invested in two veterans at this position this offseason, Kentavius Street as well as Jaleel Johnson. I think Kentavius Street is somebody that hasn't really gotten all of the reps that he really could fulfill, right? In terms of showing you who he actually is over in San Francisco. Now he kind of sees out his first deal with San Francisco, shows up in New Orleans, and now has a chance to step in and maybe be a Malcolm Brown-like player. Not necessarily to the same role, but one of those guys that's really quiet in terms of the signing, but then ends up having a big impact when it comes to the season. Remember, the Saints signed Malcolm Brown and no one talked about it really. And then all of a sudden, Malcolm Brown ended up being one of the better free agency additions for the team that offseason. I think the same thing could happen with Kentavius Street at a position where things are still in chalk. You don't know who's going to be that guy next to David Onyemata, so the door is wide open for Kentavius Street. And finally, Zac Bond gets traded. It's a bold prediction. It really is. Like, you invested a third-round selection in this guy. Rumor has it they were willing to invest a first-round selection in this guy at one point. So it's bold to say that they're going to end up moving on from this guy that they have clearly been highly invested in, but just simply hasn't really panned out for the role. And right now, you haven't been able to figure out what his role is outside of special teams, and you're not going to give him a contract that exceeds that at this point. So if you can get fodder back for him, and if guys like DeMarco Jackson and Pete Werner continue to pan out, you really like a veteran like Eric Wilson, you really like what Caden Ellis has given you so far, a guy that has been special teams captain material, looking back at Craig Robertson over the course of his career with the New Orleans Saints. JT Gray will probably be the special teams captain, don't get me wrong, but in terms of another guy that could turn into that leader for you over the course of time, Caden Ellis has already told me, he said it here on the show, that if he gets the chance, he'll never leave New Orleans, that he would sign a lifetime contract with New Orleans and stuff. So if they put it in front of him, you imagine Caden Ellis is going to sign it and be ready to go. So I think that for the Saints, that could potentially make a guy like Zac Bond expendable, especially considering the fact that you can get capital back for him. So my bold prediction for the New Orleans Saints there is that they do move on from Zac Bond by making him a tradable asset and maybe bring it just draft capital back, but they could also potentially find a way to address one of those other positions on the roster as well with the right deal. All right, family, those are our 10 bold predictions from listeners and myself throughout training camp. And look, we're going to have a lot of fun covering training camp over the course of the next few months. I'll be there day in, day out, every single day, bringing you observations, likely a lot of 2-a-day episodes as well, with some kind of, observation days to where we just kind of, give you all of the things that I observed during camp, and then come back later on with 3 more defined observations. Other days we'll do things a little bit different, but we'll have a lot of fun over the course of all that. Next week, we're going to spend our time getting ready for training camp. Which unit, not just players, but which unit are you most excited to see during training camp? There are 3 in particular that I am most excited to see how they develop, most excited to see them live up to expectations, and most excited to see if they can exceed expectations during training camp. We're going to break all of those down as we come back around on a Monday. Have a wonderful and safe weekend here over the course of, well, the weekend. I appreciate you as always, making us your first listen of the day every day. For your second listen today, make sure you go and check out Locked On NFL, everything you need around the league in less than 30 minutes. Chris and your boy Q giving you everything you need today. So make sure you're going to check that out wherever you get your podcasts and on YouTube as well. As for me, I appreciate you as always, making me a part of your day. If you see me, say hi. I will see y'all on Monday. But for everything you need around your New Orleans Saints, make sure you follow me on Twitter at Ross Jackson, NOLA. Hit me up. Let me know how the family's doing. Let me know how you living. Let me know how your mom and them. And trust Who Dat Nation. I'll holla at you.